All right, 2 years in, still trying to figure out how to unmute. Good afternoon, everyone. So let me get my screen pulled up here. And let me introduce you to today's session. So today we are talking about workflow automations and smart restrictions. So I am Cody Kessner. I'm a product consultant over here at Qualtrics. Be walking through the content for today. Helping me out, we do have Ryan from our support team. So he'll be watching out for the chat on Cvent Hub. If you have any questions throughout, feel free to reach out. If we have some time at the end, we can take some questions out loud. A lot of people have had very specific workflow questions that might be better emailed. So we'll see where we're at. But just understand if you do have some questions that we can't quite get to, we'll follow up with you later in the week. So this session, who's it for? It is a more advanced session, so I'm going to make a lot of assumptions about your knowledge of workflows. I'll try to just throw in some reminders if there's a one-off setting that I need to talk about. But for the most part, I assume that you know how workflows function at a basic level, how custom fields are added, things like that. We're going to really talk about the process for designing, configuring, and utilizing each feature of automation. And then at the end, we're going to tie it into smart restrictions as well. So those topics include the three aspects of automation, which are workflow launchers, wait on workflows, and data copies. So we're going to talk about specifics, show examples, hang tight there. We're going to talk about recommendations or design ideas for building your own workflows. I've got a couple great examples to show you, some that are already built, some we'll build a little bit together. And then at the end, we'll talk about smart restrictions. So how to tie that all in together. Now, our first topic here is the workflow launcher, but a slide I really should have put in here is what is an automation in the first place? So the best way to think about an automation is it is a step of a workflow that the system processes for you. So when we think about a workflow step, there's usually fields we type in, selections we make, and we push it to another responsible party. So this is a step of a workflow that we never actually see. Most you typically don't see. And it is processing something for you. And the first one we're looking at is a workflow launcher. And so this automatically initiates additional workflow instances. So launchers will automatically create new workflow instances of a specified workflow, copying over any matching custom field information in the process. So let's take a look at that and walk you through it. So we're back here in our test site. Let's open up our workflows list. And we have a workflow in here for a gadget request form. So this is a workflow where, we're part of some super secret agency. We need to request some made up gadget to get our job done to accomplish our mission. So the workflow itself is pretty typical looking. We've got some fields in here. I'm going to populate them all with myself just to make sure that it doesn't go to a different user. I know for a lot of people, what we recommend is as you are testing out workflows, either set yourself as the responsible party in these boxes or set the workflow initiator. So as we go through today, I'm going to be picking myself for every category we can. Speaking of category, what gadget do we need? I could take a new vehicle. What do we want? Well, we want something made up, or I don't know, about a really large yacht that can also fly and also has a jet ski. Sounds like it might help us out on our mission. So that's my request I'm going to make. What are we talking about? Automations. So if we look at our diagram down here at the bottom, we are creating our form. Next thing we're going to do is submit our form, and then it's going to go to a special step to launch an approval workflow. So the idea here is that we're filling out our form in one workflow, and then we're going to kick off a separate process for approval. So whenever we hit submit form, let's see what happens. Immediately looks like nothing. If you ever launch a workflow to yourself, the system takes you right back to your inbox very, very fast. Takes the system about 3-ish seconds to launch the workflow. So whenever you're testing this out, or if you do have a workflow that you launch to yourself, it's pretty uncommon. You can refresh your page, and there it is. So this isn't a gadget request form, this is a gadget request review. So let's hop in here and see what's happened. We've already got some information populated. The idea here is that we're reviewing this request, but we've already got our info filled in. So the workflow launcher kicked off this new workflow and automatically copied over information that matched it. The specifics of that is the fields have to be the exact same IDs. So I used RF employee name, category, and requested gadget. There was a fourth category we filled out, but that one's not in this workflow. If it's not in both workflows, it can't copy it over. So this is all the info we wanted to pull in. So that's how, very basically, a workflow launcher works. Pick a workflow, kick it off, copy everything we can. And that's the end of it. Now, whenever you kick off a workflow launcher, it opens up the possibility to use our other automations. A workflow launcher is the first step and the first action you need to take before any of these other automations will function. So we have wait on workflow and data copier we're going to talk about, but there's some terminology I want to introduce to you. It'll help you out. So when we're talking about launchers, we have parents and we have children. A parent is the workflow that launches. A child is the workflow that is launched. So for us, our parent workflow is our form that we fill out, and the child is the approval workflow. So parent kicks off child. I'm going to say that a lot today, so make sure you commit it to memory. Internally at Qualtrics, that's what we use. The help guide uses it as well. So now that we've got our launcher built, what else can we do? We can use a wait on workflow. And so what this does is it pauses processing on an open parent workflow until a newly launched child instance reaches a specified step. What it does, it prevents your workflow from routing to the next step until a certain criteria is met. So let's think about what use case we could have for that. Well, here we are in a gadget request review, and it launched from a form. If we check out the history tab up here, anytime you use an automation, it is going to link the workflows together. So right here, we'll see that it came from this gadget request form and this ID. So we can just click on that and hop right over. And here we arrive. So this workflow after it launched is set to wait. And so when it's waiting, it's essentially in hibernation, is a good way to think about it. A workflow in waiting is not in anyone's inbox. It won't really appear on like past due reporting or anything like that. It kind of just ghosts out of your system. You can still access it, obviously. Here we are looking at it. But nobody's taken responsibility for it, so it doesn't appear in any inbox. Now, what it's doing is this gadget request form is waiting on our gadget request review. Waiting to do what? It's waiting until the workflow reaches its close step. So the idea here is our gadget request form needs to stay open until the approval has been completed. If we didn't have the wait on workflow, what's our next step? It's viewing results. We wouldn't have any results to view if we didn't wait for it to complete. So this is a situation where you would want to use wait on workflow. And so those are the first two kind of core automations we're talking about. The last one here is data copy. And so data copy copies the data back from the launch child back to the parent. So when we use a workflow launcher, it copies from parent to child, and that information's there. What if we want to update our parent with new info that the child has provided? So that is where data copy comes in. So we're going to see it in action, and then I'll give you hopefully a nice little visual to help illustrate that for you. So our supervisor is going to go in and they're going to approve it. That sounds awesome. As long as you invite me. So yeah, we'll approve that. Just, throw me on the inner tube out back. And that's our decision. What happened? We saw that there was a data copy step it goes to, and then it closes itself out. And again, outside of a wait on workflow, you never really see an automation step happen. So that workflow copied its data back and then closed out. Our workflow is opened back up now. Why don't we see it? It's because we need to refresh our page. Here it is. So because our review workflow hit the close step, the wait on workflow automation said, all right, we're there. Let's wake back up. And now we can view the results of our request form. And would you look at that? We have our approved decision that was copied back over, as well as our supervisor comments. So this is one use case for it. We used all three. We launched it, copied the info, waited on it to finish, and then copied the info back in. So let me give you a visual on what happened in the background there, and we'll talk through it. It is this one. Pulling something up on my screen here. Now it looks like I'm staring right at you. There we go. So let's take a look at these diagrams. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over both diagrams. I think this will help us. Let's think about what's really happening in this situation. So up here at the top, we create our form. So what do we do whenever we fill out a workflow? We type in data. We fill it out with information. So the whole point of a workflow is you need to enter info and move it along. So let's grab a visual for that. Usually use a different shape. I hope this one works. Yeah, well enough. Here's our data. Let's give it a nice, let's go with this green. So here's our data we enter. So we're creating our form. We type in our gadget request info, and we push that data forward. Now, what's happening as far as the routing? So this doesn't necessarily route to here as much as it sends info and opens this up. So what's really happening is this data is getting copied alongside this new request opening. Again, it is copying the data. It doesn't cut it. It's still in the original workflow. It's just also in our child workflow. Let's see if I can do a quick little helper text here. And it might be worth our time to draw a line in here as well. There we go. So this might be the easiest way to look at it. So with this visual, let me back up and do it one more time. So we enter our information in our parent workflow. It launches our info, and we open up a received request. So this is the review. Probably name this a little better. And our data is copied. So our data does this. So now we are going along two paths, right? So our data up here goes and waits. This data down here, there's new information that's added. Depending on how you have the workflow set up, you can actually change the info too. If we had a list value, those may be multi-select, maybe the manager could go in and make additional selections. Takeaway here is that this data may change. At minimum, it may get some extra fields, but odds are the info is not going to look exactly the same as what we copied. So it's going to end up as a different color. It's a different set of data we have now. So while this is waiting, this is getting processed. So we fill out our supervisor comments. We say, yeah, let's hop on the jet ski yacht boat plane. And then we process it. Data copy happens. Again, this is copying, not cutting. And if we copy it, it copies back. Now, do we have two separate pieces of information? No. What happens is our original data is overwritten. This will close out. Once it hits the close step, this will move forward. And now we have purple data. Now, view results here, we could add some extra info to it. So this could end up as another subset of info. But the idea is the original data we sent out is probably not going to remain the same. This is if we're using the data copy, right? Because we're copying over this new information that we filled out. If you're not using a data copy, how does this look? Well, let's just throw these down here for the moment. So we type in our data. Let's say instead of data copy, this is just nothing. I guess we could just remove it entirely. So our data goes through. It gets copied still. This would go forward. We would still enter new info here. This would close out, but there's no data copy. So the original info here is still preserved. And the result is you can potentially end up with two different instances with differing information. So this is just something to think about, sort of big picture, when you're building your workflows, is how you want your data to move. Because there is a lot more to talk about. It's a lot of info to try to cram into an hour, all the specifics of how you could set this up. But just keep in mind what's going to happen to your data as you begin to design some of these automations for yourself. One other important note that a question that came up earlier today, want to make sure I cover, is for data copy. So let's say we bring data copy back in. Welcome back. I like to paint the automation steps nice bright color. Is that, let's say we don't have a wait on workflow. So let's go through one last example here, one last squiggly example. Type in our data, copies. This goes forward, this closes out. This workflow could be closed forever. Let's say it's closed for a year. This workflow, we finally get around to it and we update our information. Whenever this data copy hits, it is still going to overwrite back to the original workflow. That wait on workflow step usually works in conjunction, but you do not need it. And if you do copy data back, it will overwrite the parent workflow at any point with the information that it can copy back to it. So a lot of people have use cases for that. A lot of users may not think about that when they're building their workflow. So even if it's a year down the road, we could end up overriding this info as needed. All right, so hopefully that was a helpful visual for you. I want to now talk about some other ways to actually apply this in your workflows and how to get this all going and set up. So some of this info we'll still kind of refer back to. But for now, let's hop back into our site. All right, so why would we want to use expirations in the first place? Let me give you 2, 3 examples. One of the first ones would be to hide information from users. Might sound a little odd. You already know that you can go and restrict instance access and things like that. But let me give you an actual example of something we did in the past year or so when we rebuilt one of our best-in-class workflows. So in the past, we had a corrective action workflow. Started with a nonconformance report, and if it was valid, kept going. It went to corrective action, went to root cause analysis, developing the plan, and so on. So we broke that up. What is one of the main reasons why we did that? Well, let me show you. Employee A damaged. So let's say that I'm just a warehouse worker. I know that if something happens, I need to put in a non-conforming report. Done. That first step I just typed in, that's all I needed to do was say that something happened. From here, QA would pick it up, right? Or some team that's going to review a nonconformance would take a look at it and see what needs to be done. So in our original workflow, we had our nonconformance report, and then it became valid, and then it went to root cause, and then developing a plan, and so on. One of the rules of workflows, here's a refresher for you, is that if you are the initiator for a workflow, you can follow that workflow through its life. Meaning that if I initiated this, just real quick, log in, put this in, no other security, no other permissions, anything like that. I can see what QA comments were entered. I can see what root cause was found out. I could go in, I could see the corrective action plan. I could see if disciplinary actions are listed in there, if HR actions are listed in there. Whoever initiates a workflow can follow it through its life, even when it's closed. That is a system default. You cannot remove that. Unless you split these processes up. So the idea here is that the non-conforming event gets recorded. Sorry, this is a little blurry. Goes to the review step, and then QA kicks off a separate corrective action workflow. And so our user would not be the initiator of that process. Technically QA would, that's a quick note. Whoever kicks off a workflow is the initiator for that workflow. But our employee that filled out the non-conformance details, his view of the record stops there because we can lock down our corrective action workflow. We can say that only management can see all of the instances there. So this change in philosophy, I feel like helps really give you better control of who can see what in your site. So if you have certain workflows right now that may have, pretty open use cases right up front at the beginning processes, the first couple steps, but then down the road may involve HR info, may involve proprietary secrets. You may want to consider splitting those workflows up and launching them out just to keep that information separate. And so the workflow that we're going to build to at the end of today is an example of that. So we'll come back to this and I'll talk about it again. Now, another really cool use case for automation is the idea of a launcher workflow. So a lot of customers like to build workflows that replace like Excel spreadsheets and daily forms that you have to fill out, right? So something like an equipment maintenance log. On its own, if we needed to do equipment maintenance, we would come in here every day, we would fill in the equipment that we need to maintain today. We'd go in, we'd say, all right, we performed it today. Expected results were within range. I'm not in this list, but we'll put Corey in there. And we'd say maintenance complete. And then tomorrow, we'd log in, we'd open it up, we'd say maintenance complete. We do that every day. Now you can automate a workflow opening up every day. We do have the ability to expire workflows, right? So if we opened up our workflow administration, we opened up equipment maintenance, we could just set it to expire. So if I take it offline, we can set it to expire. And if we need to do this every day or every week, that takes care of it, right? Well, let's think about that. So let's see if I can grab another little graphic real quick. This one. So let's say this is our whole workflow. This is something we need to do every day. Very short, very concise. Let's think about our data. What is happening with our data there? If we expire the same workflow, it's going to open the same instance. So we push our data forward, we push it back, and we add more info. So our data changes. We push it forward, it opens tomorrow. We add more info, changes again. So it ends up being either one workflow that has information constantly changing inside of it. From a quality perspective, you don't necessarily want. You want to have, concrete records of everything. Or it becomes one really bloated workflow with one big subform. If this is something you're doing every day and you're updating the info in one workflow every day, it's going to become pretty big, pretty bloated, pretty quick. So the way our workflow works is we utilize a launcher to help out with some of that bloat and ultimately help out with your record keeping. So let's put this back online. And let me walk you through what a scheduler workflow looks like. I'm even going to make a quick change just to simplify this conversation. Let's say we need a piece of equipment to be calibrated every month. Every 1 month, we need a piece of equipment to calibrate. I know I'm moving fast here. Once I get this online, I'm going to walk you through it slowly. Okay. So we have two workflows. We have our actual equipment maintenance, which is where the maintenance is done, and we have a scheduler. So the idea with the scheduler is it's a very simple workflow. It is 3 steps, typically. We're going to ignore this top bit for the moment. It's a step where we assign who needs to do the work and pre-fill any of the info. And then we launch the equipment maintenance workflow. And then it closes out. What happens after this is it's set to expire. So after 30 days, this workflow moves from closed. What step does it move to? Moves to the launch equipment maintenance workflow step. And then what happens? It closes out immediately. So now, every 30 days, this workflow automatically kicks itself off and closes out. You never see it moving. What that does, though, is that sends out a unique instance of equipment maintenance every 30 days. So instead of having one massive log of all your info, or instead of having to manually go in and do it yourself every day, you're now getting unique instances with potentially just clean information that you fill out every single time. And the advantage there is you have all of your records maintained separately. It's all still reportable, so it's really easy to go in and see it all together. It's just you have more flexibility. You don't have to go look at this one massive workflow that if somebody were to accidentally delete, let's say, you would lose, a year of information. So with the workflow, this is again one of our best in class. Some of you may use it, some of you may not. There are some extra optimizations there, but let me just show you what this looks like. We would go in as a manager and we'd say that this piece of equipment needs to be scheduled out every 30 days, since that's what our expiration is set to, every month. Fill this out real quick. We want to send it to Cody. And ideally, this is the only time we would ever have to open our scheduler, is for the initial information. And now it's managing itself. So what it does, like every other workflow, it goes to launch it, takes it a second or two. And so we have our initial equipment maintenance here. All of this info has been filled out for us already, but we have our unique spot to fill out the maintenance info for this workflow. So today we'd go in just like we did before, fill in everything. We'd say we completed our maintenance. Good to go. And we're done. So we take a quick peek at our scheduler workflow. Let's use our advanced search up here at the top. Go to Equipment Maintenance Scheduler. Let's take a look at that last instance. It is set to expire in 1 month. So in 1 month, it will automatically open. It will automatically send Cody another instance of the workflow that looks just like the one we just filled out. It will not have the subform filled out because that info is not inside of the scheduler. So every month you get a nice clean sheet to work from. So that scheduler setup can help automate a lot of those daily checklists, weekly checklists, monthly checklists. And once you get them started, there's really nothing else you need to do. If you ever need to stop a scheduler, if you quit a process or need to adjust it, you can either take the workflow offline, the scheduler workflow, or you could go in here, and if you delete the instance of the scheduler, that will stop it. Keep in mind that this is separate from the actual maintenance flow. So your info is still kept safe. This is just the scheduler itself. We could take it offline, delete it, build a new one if we'd like, and go from there. All right, so those are two best-in-class examples that some of you may be using with automation. If you're not, no worries there. Everybody's got their own personalized use for automation. What I want to do here, sort of getting towards the end of workflows, is show you how to put this information into a workflow, how to get these automations up and running. So real quick, the easiest way to show you how to do that in a design tool is we'll pull up one we already have. And all you need to do as you're designing a workflow in the Workflow Designer is click on a step you want to be an automation step and hit this little gear at the top. It says set as an action state. And this is now queued up to when we import it into Qualtrics, it'll be ready to accept automation. If you do not do that when you import a workflow, you're going to have to delete the step and then re-enter it into your workflow. So that is kind of concrete set. A step is either a user, which is the default, or an automation step. So what does that actually look like in the site? Well, I have a workflow built for us that needs some automation. So let's go in here and add it in. Real quick, just to make something work here in just a minute. We have to do a little bit of cleanup in between sessions. I want to make sure that part 2 of our mystery workflow is going to do what I need it to. So hang tight there. We need it to do that. All right, off-screen mysteries. So we have a workflow built here for Tuesday session 2, which is you. So this workflow is one that our secret agency uses to send information out to our agents. So whenever we have a new top secret mission, we need to send that info to, whichever agent is going to be, blowing something up. So this workflow has instructions, details, and a review, which is really like an approval. What's not in here is information that goes to the agent themselves. So I already have a separate workflow built that the agent can receive and get all their info. And I need this workflow to kick that one off. So if we want to add a new step to an existing workflow and make it an automation one, let's show you how to do that. So under add a new step, we will give it a title. So launch agent workflow. Instead of user, it's an automation step. That's the big change there. Now, a lot of you have probably seen plenty of user steps. You know that if we click on instructions, we'll see responsible parties, collaborators, fields, and so on. Whenever we look at an automation step, this is what we see. So it's just looking for those automations for us to add. Well, the first thing we want to do, and the essential step 1 for automation, is a workflow launcher. I'll go ahead and throw it out there. There are 4 options in here. Form filler is an automation that has to be configured by Qualtrics. So it's nothing that you can influence or direct necessarily. So it is outside of the scope of our session today. Again, you can click it, you can type in some numbers here, but it's not going to function without reaching out to Qualtrics. So workflow launcher here. Which workflow do we want to launch? Well, luckily it's this one right up top. So this is our classified. We assign a mission out to our agent. Let's add that in. And so we have a couple extra options that appear. Whenever we launch this workflow, who do we want to launch it to? If we hit this button, it's the usual suspects. So we can bring in groups of people. We could bring in individuals, use custom fields, or we can use the initiator. We would want to assign this out to the agent, but I'm testing it out, so let's keep it with me. Now this is a nice little detail, is that whoever the responsible party is here does overwrite the child workflow's natural responsible party. So you can assign anyone any workflow using a launcher. So if I were to, let's say, take a look at my workflow list, I don't have a corrective action workflow in here, but I could still be assigned one. I'm just not able to start the process. So over here we do have launch options. We're going to see 2, but we're only able to adjust 1 at the moment. So let's talk about that one. List field. Launch the workflow if the following list field only contains the selected value. So this works like a route exception. We are able to pick a list value in our workflow, and we say that if mission decision equals accept, then yes, we do want to launch the workflow. So instead of having to route around an automation, you can route through it. It just checks as it's going through it, hey, do we need to launch a workflow or not? Let's look at this field. It says accept. Yes, let's launch a workflow. Or routes to that step. Does it say accept? No. Then keep moving, and it will not launch a workflow. And so if we think back to our visual here, well, I've kind of broken it now. Let me pull up the original one. I'll stare directly at you again. Very awkward. It is this one. So I want to bring up the visual just to compare it to what we saw before. In our initial gadget request form, we had two workflow steps that are automation. We had it launch, and then it moves to a wait step. For a visual, I felt this was necessary. In a workflow, you do not need to have these on separate steps. One step can hold all of the automation. So after we launch the workflow, we can go ahead and tell it to wait. What do we want it to wait on? We want it to wait on, yes, the classified mission assigned. You want to make sure this is the same workflow as your launcher. Otherwise, it just won't wait because it won't have a workflow that it's waiting on. And then we get to specify which step that we want it to wait on. So mission completion results is the last step of our mission assigned workflow. So we want this agent workflow to stay open until our agent says mission complete. And that's all you have to do to set up the wait on workflow. There's no additional settings other than to remove it. So our automation is set up at this point. We just need to patch our workflow because there's no routing to it right now. If we try to put it online, it'll give us a couple error messages. So we need to say mission reviewed. Instead of going to the summary, which is our close step, let's take it to the launch step. And then once it launches, and once it's finished waiting, we need it to have a mission complete route. And so routes coming out of automations, they will never really appear as buttons. You don't press them, the system presses them for you. So we should be able to put this online now. All right. So let's take a look at what's happened. Let's kick off our mission. So we need to send an agent out on the field. So this workflow is used to communicate secret mission info to any agent across the globe. Press engage to submit. All right. Here's our form. So where are we sending them? Let's go South America. Approving agent, that's going to be agent J. Oh, not that. Who are we sending? We're going to send Sean out. What's their assignment? Let me think. What do we want to do? Let's go with, let's just say blow up an embassy, usual stuff. Blow up an embassy, set fire to a town, and, blow up an expensive sports car. Typical stuff. Code name, every good mission's got to have a code name. I've used all of the good Bond code names at this point. So I'm just going to reuse Spectre since it's fresh on the mind. Assignment due date, we need this done by next Wednesday. And that's our mission details. So this goes to an agent for approval. If we press accept, it will launch that workflow. If we press deny, the workflow will close. So we do accept it. We do want to let our agent know that they've got to go, ruin a town. So it's launching. Let's refresh. And here it is. Sean has received his mission. All of that initial info has copied over. So that's the launcher in action, copies it over. So Sean goes out on the mission. While he's out on the mission, if we take a peek at our history, we can see what's going on with our initial workflow, our parent. and it's hanging out here. It is waiting. It's waiting on the mission assigned to hit the result step. So we come back and we need to attach a classified summary. So here's all the juicy details of what happened. But we also need the public summary, right? We can't just tell everyone exactly what happened. We gotta have gotta save face a little bit here. So our public summary is, luxury trip to the beach, fireworks on the last day. Met some new friends. How about that? So that's what we're going to tell everybody happened. But what actually happened is hidden in here. Below here we have incident details. So what's this about? Well, this allows us to tie in data copy and the not just data copy. This allows us to tie in the last option we had for a launcher. So let's take a look at this workflow real quick. Let's go to its definition and see what's happening in the background here. So it has the ability to launch its own child. So everything we've talked about up to this point, it's been a parent launching a child, and then another parent launching another child. You can have a parent that launches a child, launches 3 children, and so on. There's not really a limit to how deep you can go with automation layers. So in our case here, what we can do is we can fill out an incident description. So we can say, the forest fire was one. We can add a row for another one. Punch the prime minister. It happens. And, we sink a government yacht. Government, let's say boat. I don't know if government yachts are a thing. I'm sure they are. So we sink a government boat. These are incidents that happened, and we have a separate workflow for the cleanup team. So we need them to take care of it. So what's happened in the background then is on this launch incident report, we have 2 automations. We have workflow launcher and data copy. So for the mission incident reports, we hit our launch options. It's going to look at this incident detail subform and launch a new instance of the workflow for each row in the following subform. So for each of these incident details we fill out, it will launch a separate instance. So we'll have, once we submit this, we'll have 3 new workflows to work out of. On top of that, we built in the data copy to this step. How do you configure data copy? Very easy. You simply select data copier, you pick the workflow to copy it back to. That's it. If any fields match, they'll copy. Those are the rules. It works the same way that the launcher does. As long as the IDs of the fields are the same, it's going to copy from the parent to the child. If the child has the data copier, keep in mind the child needs it, not the parent, then it will see if any fields match and copy those back. So let's finish out this workflow. Completion date, we finished early. Mission complete. And so right now, it is launching 3 new workflows because it hit those criteria. And it is also copying the info back to our first workflow, our parent. We refresh our page. Now we have 3 separate incidents with each issue that happened. So now our cleanup team maybe can go in and assign themselves, assess the damage. A forest is worth probably a couple billion, say 5 billion. and then they can clean it up. This is all attached back to each workflow. So the history of this one will take us to the workflow that launched it. This one's now closed out. History of this one will show all 3 workflows it launched. And we can go back to our original workflow. And so here's something pretty cool we did. So this is our original mission, and this is the mission summary. So I can go in and I can check what happened. I kicked off this mission. I'm just a lowly agent, not supposed to know the juicy details. So when I take a peek in here, I see the public summary, but we chose to not bring that field with the classified info into this workflow. So when it copied back, those fields didn't match and it didn't copy. So now we have a more public-facing workflow. But if we have the ability to go in and see the classified one, here's where we can get the juicy details. So that's using a launcher. It's separating all your info out just like that. So I hope this was a cool example for you. I had fun building it. Kind of goes through, each part of the recommendations we talked about. And that really covers everything for automation in today's session. There is one last little task that we want to take care of here at the end, and that is talking about smart restrictions. So smart restrictions tie into workflows primarily, but they can be used elsewhere. So to access them, we go under Administration Smart Restrictions. You do need a permission to see these. And we have one in there right now. But what do smart restrictions do? Smart restrictions restrict values in one custom field using selected values in a different custom field. So we say that if value A equals X, then value B needs to equal Y. Let me show you what we're talking about. Here in our define mission workflow, once we engaged, we had to pick our location and our approving agent. Now, if I've been on the force for 20 years, I probably know who is the approving agent out of Africa. I know it's M. But let's say we're new to the job. We may not know some of these values. So it leaves us the ability to have info that doesn't make sense. You wouldn't want North America and J and the agent to be Sean if they all work out of different facilities. So we can set in some boundaries of our custom fields in our workflow to make sure that these selections make sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a smart restriction that looks at location and restricts our approving agent selection as a result. So up here, let's hit Add Smart Restriction. First thing you need to do is give it a title. Got it queued up already. So Approving Agent Restriction is what we're going to call it. We'll also probably call it like Americas. That'll make sense in a moment. So you have a source field and a field to restrict. So field 1, field 2. Our source is the first field we select, which is location. So whenever we open this up, we have some categories. Primarily, you're probably using list and personnel fields, but if you have a use case, you can also use documents and standards. So our first is a list field. It's location. We add that in there. Now it's ready. What do we want to restrict as a result? We want to restrict a personnel field, which is the approving agent. So let's add that. So once we have 2 fields in, it'll show us across our site everywhere that those 2 fields appear together. Again, we're primarily talking about workflows here, but you also see folder and personnel. So if you do have custom fields in documents that need a similar hierarchy, where you can make selections and restrict down, that's available to you as well. This also allows you to turn it on and off for different workflows. So if our classified one doesn't need it, we don't have to enable it. We only want this for defined mission here. So we know the field, we know the target. Now we need specifics. So to the right here, we'll hit edit and we pick our values. Now the first time you press this, it'll be a little small. After you save one of your choices, you'll have the full list here. So this is, we have North America, South America, all our regions. We're setting the approve agent restriction for the Americas. So if the mission location equals North America or South America, you can have multiple, then what? We'll go to our target field. And for approving agent, we'll say that C is over the Americas. Save our choice, and we have an if-then statement that walks us through exactly what will happen. If location equals North or South America, then approving agent will only contain C. So let's finish adding this. Let's see that in action. So location, if I pick Africa, could be anyone. If I pick Oceania, could be anyone. If I pick South America, it's only C that I can pick. And so we could build some additional ones to cascade that down further. So if C is selected, we can build another restriction that then restricts our agents. If our agents are restricted, maybe another field gets locked down. This really helps with dynamic routing as you're building your workflows, things like an approving agent. Because if you have a workflow that maybe needs to go different locations depending on department or depending on certain categories that are met, certain criteria, if something's like a super red status, maybe it needs to go to a certain person. You can use these smart restrictions to help set those barriers up and force the workflow down a certain path. So your end user that doesn't know what actually needs to be selected will be forced into making the correct selection. And we are right about at time. So I'll turn it over to Ryan for just a minute. Don't know if we'll have a bunch of time for answers, but any questions pop up that I can help out with?
So far, we had one question and it's been answered.
Like to hear it. Awesome. Well, I know this is a lot of info, so for some of you, you might still be processing it. I think you can go back and rewatch these videos. So if you do have any other questions, we've talked about it all day. Feel free to reach out to us at services@qualtrics.com. That will allow myself or some of my other coworkers to get back to you about specifics with the sessions that we talked about. So if you have a specific question about what I said in here, what I saw, what you saw, just let me know. Services@qualtrics.com. You'll also have support you can reach out to in the future. So if here, in 6 months, you finally build a new workflow and you get stuck somewhere, feel free to reach out to us. Always happy to help. So thanks everyone for attending. I think there might be a closing session. I'm not too sure. This is my last session I'm teaching for the day. So thanks everyone for participating, and look forward to any other questions we have, and ideally here in a year or so, maybe we can meet in person. So thanks again, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you around.